This episode is brought to you by Cieara tampons. Made from 100% certified organic cotton, every Cieara product is made with pure and ethically sourced ingredients. No pesticides, no fragrances, no bleach, no BPA, no synthetic materials. If you're still using conventional tampons, we need to talk. You don't even know what you're putting in your vagina. Head over to Cieara.life/fertilityfriday today, and you'll get your first month's supply free of charge. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 137. Welcome to the 137th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm so excited to share today's episode with you. I've been talking a lot about it in a couple of the previous episodes. Recently, I actually reached out to the members of my Fertility Friday community, my Facebook group, and I asked them to share their stories about hormonal contraceptives, whether it was their stories on it or coming off of it. And the response was really incredible. I had so many comments on that thread, and I did have a number of women reach out to me privately to share their experiences on hormonal birth control. And so I actually invited a few of these women to come on the show and share their experiences on the pill. And so I'm really excited to share those with you. In today's episode, I'm going to share two stories with you. I'm going to share Briana's story and Cieara's story. So it's kind of like a two-parter. So go into one interview and then another. And so I just want to thank you so much, Briana and Cieara, for coming on the show and sharing your story. I know it's going to make a difference in a number of different ways. I feel like it makes a difference in the sense that if you're listening and you've had a similar experience, but you just felt kind of crazy, like inside, kind of like there was something wrong with you, I feel like this helps to validate it because it really helps us as women to get our stories out there and to feel heard. Because especially when you have emotional effects that are harder to put your finger on, if you have like a, you know, if you cut yourself, like a paper cut on your finger and your finger starts to bleed, that's really tangible. You can say, I have a paper cut and it's bleeding. But if you start to feel super anxious and start having panic attacks, that feels a little bit more esoteric. It's often harder to feel confident that this is what was causing it. But when you have a group of women that then have similar experiences and they share them in that type of context, then that really helps just for those experiences to be validated, because then you know it's not just you. And before we jump into today's episode, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Cieara tampons. So for those of you who have never heard of Cieara, Cieara is a really incredible company that makes tampons for the modern woman. And what I love about Cieara tampons is that one of the interesting things about them, actually, if you haven't had a chance to head over to their website, then head over there and take a look at just the product and the packaging. So if you go to fertilityfriday.com/Cieara, Cora, it'll redirect you right to the page and you can check them out. One of the things that's really great about Cieara is that they're designing products for actual adult women. There's no pink frilly stuff. There's no weird blue boxes with yellow stripes or dots. The packaging is really clean and neat. And so it's not about hiding your period, but it's just about not having to announce it to the world. If you're at a business meeting, you can actually put the little vegan leather case beside your cell phone and no one would be the wiser, essentially. I love that they've taken that into consideration in terms of an environmental impact. The packaging of the product is really minimal. What I love about Cieara tampons is that the materials used to make the actual tampons are sourced ethically. So not only are they made from 100% organic cotton, so no synthetic materials, no pesticides and herbicides or other estrogenic chemicals that could, make your menstrual periods worse, but they take it to another level. So not only are they sourcing organic cotton, the farms that they're sourcing from are ethically staffed. They ensure that employment is voluntary, that working conditions are safe, fair wages are paid, and no child labor is ever used. That's one of the things that I love about this company because everything has been done very intentionally. So down from the packaging to the materials sourced in the tampons and even to the business model where you sign up for a subscription And every few months, you actually get your specific tailored order of tampons sent directly to your doorstep. So I would definitely encourage you to head over to fertilityfriday.com/Cora, and you'll be redirected to the page there. And when you sign up, you actually get your first month free. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/Cora. Now let's jump back into today's episode. Okay, so we're going to jump into the interview that I did with Briana, where she shares her experience on hormonal contraceptives. I'm really excited to be here with Briana today. So Briana is a member of the Fertility Friday community, which is pretty awesome. And she reached out to me and shared what her experience was like on the pill. And so Briana, your story really touched me, and just like all of the stories that I hear do. And so as I was saying to you in our pre-chat, this is my way of channeling my frustration in a positive way by giving you the ability to at least share what your experience was like. So maybe we could just start by, when was the first time that you went on it, and how did that all come about and what that was like for you?
Okay, so I am 28 years old. When I was 19 and I was in college and I first started being sexually active, I decided to try going on the pill, and I believe it was orthotricycline. I'm not sure if it was orthotricycline or orthotricycline low, but I was only on it for 3 days. When during those 3 days, I had uncontrollable anxiety, depression. I couldn't stop crying. I'm a musician. I remember I was doing a gig, and during the break at the rehearsal, I called my boyfriend, like completely in tears. I had no idea why. It was just a horror. And it lasted for 3 days. I went back to the clinic at my college, and they saw the stress that I was in and immediately thought that I had some history that I hadn't told them about when they had prescribed it to me. So then they made an appointment for me to go see someone at the school. And because things get booked up so quickly, that appointment wasn't for a month later. Of course, by that time, I was my completely normal, happy self again. This also happened to be before, I live in the US, this happened to be before the Affordable Care Act went into effect. And because I wanted to keep this from my parents at the time, I paid out of pocket, and it was before they had some subsidies for birth control at college clinics. So, of course, that was not a good experience. But about 6 months later, I had a, quote, pregnancy scare, which I now realize was probably a stressed out college student with a late ovulation. And so then I thought, okay, I'll find something else.
And sorry, so yeah. After those 3 days, did you stop taking the pill then?
Yes, I did. Okay. After 3 days.
And then everything kind of went back to normal?
Yes, pretty much. So then when I went on Yaz, I was on that for about 17 or 18 months. I overall did not have a horrible experience with it. However, there were moments I did have low libido, and I was in a long-term relationship. My partner was very supportive, but we knew that something was wrong and that it was we knew for sure that it was the pill that was causing it. So that happened for a while. And then once I realized that maybe that was enough for me with that, especially the low libido, that I went off of it. And I noticed within a month or two that it had gone back to normal. And then in retrospect, I did realize that on Yaz, I probably was more snippy and there's more anger. I was probably more judgmental when I was on it. And of course, I didn't realize that until afterwards. So I didn't know that I was perhaps not as friendly to the people close to me as I would have been.
See, I can totally see someone listening and thinking like, well, you know, it's easy to say and that kind of stuff. But as I was talking about I mentioned to you that I interviewed Samantha right before, our interview today. And she talked about, not the exact same situation, but it's that same kind of thing where you're having these changes in your moods and your emotions. There's no real way to definitively say like, okay, it's this. But then if you feel that way while you take it and then you don't feel that way when you're not, I mean, what else, like, what else could it be?
Right. Right. And I experienced that even more so, not compared to that first time that I was on the pill for 3 days, but for several years, I was just like, no, I don't want to do this. And then when I got married, we wanted to have an option for not having to use barrier methods all the time. And this was before I found fertility awareness. And I originally went to my doctor looking for an IUD, and she said, well, why don't we try something that's non-procedural first? And I did share my concerns based off of my previous history with it. But she said, oh, you can always come back and we'll deal with this. So I went on, I believe it was Ceronics at that time. And within a month, I was like, I don't know about this. I went back in and she said, oh, a month is too soon. So that was...
Oh, Lord.
Yeah. So then for whatever reason, whether it was me being on vacation or not around, or just maybe perhaps even the stress of being on the pill, I didn't actually go back for several more months after that. And during that time, I may have had legitimate stressors that were external, but my reaction to them was not normal. I'm most certain because of the pill. So I was really emotional. I was fighting with my husband all the time, which of course is even more stressful. And then you get more frustrated. I cried in front of my boss, which was thrilling. And
every woman's dream.
Yes.
Right there.
Right. So that was stressful, to say the least. And I just remember one day I was in the lobby at lunchtime at where I work, and I had finally had enough. And I called the service where through my employer I could try to get a counselor. And I went to the therapist, and the first several sessions, I was like crying the entire way through. She was wondering what is going on. And then as we slowly figured things out, and she was supportive of me trying to figure out going off of the pill or changing things, then we found that things got better, and we were together for several months. And at the end, she thought I was a completely different person.
Wow.
So it was incredible how my responses to things changed, that the legitimate stressors that happened, I could not control my reactions to them. I probably was paranoid. I probably made things up and, just creating narratives in your head. So it was probably one of the darkest times in my life. And I'm just talking about the emotional things. I realized after I finally stopped the pill that there were all these physical things that I hadn't realized.
Yeah. What were some of the physical effects that you noticed afterward?
I noticed more blurry eyesight. For me, I probably had bloating a lot more often. I had constant fatigue and low strength. So I go to a regular group exercise class. And I remember during that time, I was always the last person to finish. I was just constantly tired. I didn't even want to go. It was a struggle to get me there. And then I noticed right after I went off the pill that suddenly I was in the middle of the pack. And I have no idea that that was the case. I also had baggy eyes. Like I look at pictures from that time and I just look tired. And then at the time I had a non-existent libido, which led to painful sex. That's, of course, another relationship stressor, and that doesn't help the situation.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry to hear that you had such a hard time on the pill. And I've been saying this in every interview that I do. Of course, I want to acknowledge that not every woman has the same experience. So some women they just don't have as obvious effects. But when I interviewed Holly Griggs-Spall, so back in episode 21, and that is a long time ago, and she's the author of the book Sweetening the Pill. And that, I remember talking to her about it and her experience of it. And it's just, there were so many things that she said that she experienced, that she also found groups of other women who had also experienced the very same things. And it was almost like that eerie, like feeling like some of the things that she described were like feeling paranoid and in a particular way, like thinking her, oh, if her partner was late coming home, like, oh, he must be dead, like that kind of stuff, like really. And then she was like, I just thought I was going crazy. But then she would join these groups of women who are taking the same brand of pill, and they would be saying basically the same things. So that same kind of weird thought pattern of paranoia. But as women, there's that whole stereotype of our emotionality lends itself to us just thinking it's just us. Mm-hmm. And it just kills me. So I feel like a lot of women say like, oh, I didn't experience anything. But what if you had been properly briefed in advance about the possible side effects? Then you would have known to look for them. And arguably, if you knew to look for them, maybe you would have, made the proper attribution instead of thinking it was you, type of thing.
I certainly agree with that. If I had known that all of these things for sure were caused by the pill, then it would have been a different experience. I knew that most of it was, or I knew that some of it was at the time, but I didn't realize to the extent all of these things being connected, especially when it came to the fatigue and the lack of strength, that I thought I was lazy. I thought that, oh, if I just got more sleep, if I went to bed earlier or something. And I'm finding now I have the same schedule. It's not about that. It's about the fact that this was affecting my energy level. And that's just one of the examples, just like some of the other things that you could even see in my face, like I mentioned with the pictures that I see of myself. It's incredible that that was all caused by the pill and that I don't feel that way anymore. I would never have known if it wasn't for me actually thinking about it. And like you said, I think there's this assumption with women that, we're emotional, or maybe there's this unpredictable nature. And with the percentage of women that are on the pill, could that be part of it?
Well, that's a pretty big question. And so, part of the reason that I wanted you to come on the show and share your story is we live in a time that is very cerebral, where we all, and I'm the same way. Like, I want proof. I want the scientific evidence too. I'm just, just like every other girl. Like, I want to know that there's evidence to back stuff up. But at the end of the day, we can't continue to discount our individual experiences. So I could completely see like a board of physicians saying, well, in Briana's case, she clearly was sensitive to the hormones. They could argue, well, perhaps a different formulation. I could see these arguments coming forward. Perhaps a different formulation would have been more suitable for her, or it's just about her. And it's not in my head, because as I delve deeper into the research about hormonal contraceptives, I found a study in particular where they were looking at the characteristics of women who complain about, so instead of looking at the drug, they wanted to learn more about the women who have the adverse effects. And the tone and the writing of the study essentially is to advise doctors of how to prescribe this medication to women. So it's like to help the doctors more effectively prescribe so that they can understand better the characteristics of the women who complain. Because essentially it's not the drug, it's you is the overarching. Right. You're just sensitive to it. It's not the drug. There's nothing wrong with the drug. There's just certain women that are sensitive to it. And that's obviously complete and utter poppycock.
Right.
Or whatever. It's explicative. And so the other thing that I wanted to say to kind of validate what you were saying is there's a lot of scientific evidence to support why your mood would shift. And this is the essence of why I do the podcast, because for some reason we have been given the impression that our menstrual cycle is kind of like this cool add-on. Like, like if you drive a car and you can buy like a different feature. So like, okay, so maybe I'll get a sunroof. So that idea that we're kind of just like men, except we have this cool feature, like we have ovaries, but it's not like it's integral to our health or anything. It's just like this cool feature. But it turns out that when you shut down a woman's ovaries, it has these far-reaching effects in so many different areas that it just blows the mind. And so I just feel like the scientific literature has not reached, the scientific literature is there, but it hasn't reached the point that it's affecting the recommendations for the medications.
Right.
And to validate your experience regarding painful sex, there are studies that I recently released a blog post, and one of the points on that was that the pill is associated with low libido for lots of reasons. We've talked about that on the podcast. It lowers testosterone, like across the board. So regardless of how you experience that, know that your testosterone is a quarter of what it would be if you weren't on it, right? Like It's a quarter. And then when you go off of it, it goes back up to half.
Yes.
Half. So, and then they don't know exactly how long it takes to get back to the full or if it ever does. So that's a kind of a hormonal reality. And that's why it works. Because if it didn't lower your hormones, it wouldn't work. That's like, it has to. If it didn't lower your natural output of estrogen, kill off the progesterone, and like testosterone is part of the deal. So if it didn't do that, it wouldn't work. So that's the whole point of it, right? So we can't pretend like it doesn't lower testosterone because that's what it's meant to do. Anyway, so I digress. But one of the specific in the research around libido, the testosterone plays a role there, but there is a link to painful sex because the pill for some women has a physical effect on your vulva and your clitoris and the tissues around your vaginal opening. So there's a number of studies that show that the pill is associated with a reduction in the volume of your clitoris. Like it shrinks your clit.
Oh.
And then, I know, right? And then it thins the tissue around the opening of your vulva.
Right. Well, the clitoris thing is very interesting because, in this most recent experience, it was very painful. I had vaginal dryness and all of that. But I'm thinking back to several years ago when I was on Yaz, so in my early 20s, that it wasn't quite the experience that I had recently. However, I had trouble ever reaching orgasm, which was not usually the case. So it's very interesting that that's the reality, and that certainly would explain why.
Well, and it's a balance. I think it's important to have that scientific validation because then we can have that to say, like, well, an independent researcher has found that this is the case. But I think that we can't discount our own accounts of how these things affect us. So we can't just look at your experience and say, well, that's just Briana. And Briana is sensitive to hormones. Like we can't just discount individual women. I believe that it would look a lot different if we were hearing from actual women about their experiences on it instead of looking at an insert saying that you may experience changes in sexual desire, because the way that they placate us with the language around the side effects, it just perpetuates this unending cycle where you really aren't being informed about what could happen.
Right.
So maybe share with us, okay, so now you've been off of it, share with us like what that's been like and how you really came to that, knowing that this was actually what was behind it.
Well, I knew that it was a possibility that a lot of, especially the emotional issues, were caused by this because of some of the previous experiences that I had had. But my doctor had encouraged me to try something else, and I did. And I was excited about that, and I do believe it was a little bit better, but I knew that things still just weren't quite right. I think I was starting to notice the things with my energy level. I started, as crazy as it is, you just start Googling some of these possibilities. Is this a side effect? And once I started figuring out that all of these minor things where I thought I was getting old, I was like 27 and thinking, why do I feel like I'm aging? Why is my eyesight blurry? Why do I feel like I have no energy? Why do I have back pain? And once I started looking these things up, the light bulbs going off, I decided this just has to go. And well, I'm in the US military, so you have to go to see your doctor. It's a requirement because it's a part of your job. So I almost just stopped it without telling them. And then I called to cancel an appointment saying that I was just going to go off a medication. And the person said, oh, why don't you just come in and tell her? And I think I came in looking very stern because I knew I was going to have to fight for myself. And while my doctor was very supportive and said, okay, you want to be off of this, great. I think she thought that my personality had changed. And it was more just that I came in guarded because I wanted to make sure that I was fighting for myself. And the most interesting thing was that when I told her this, she suggested, oh, what if we give you prenatal vitamins, as if being off the birth control pill means that you're going to get pregnant. And so that was kind of shocking. And not that there's anything wrong with prenatal vitamins, but it wasn't necessary, that the assumption that I can't take care of myself.
Yeah, no, that's an important observation. The way I look at that is that it reflects her own, because remember, your doctor, she is also a woman.
Right.
Who has the same beliefs as we all did, or did, depending on if this is the first time you're tuning into the show. But she has the same beliefs around her own fertility. She believes that pregnancy is 100% going to happen unless you're on the pill, because we were all taught that. You can get pregnant every single day. There's no safe days. And if you have sex, you're going to get pregnant.
Right.
So that's the narrative. So then for her to be like, okay, I think you should get some prenatals, it aligns exactly with what we were all taught, which is that essentially if you're not on the pill, you will get pregnant.
Right. And I think especially where I work, because I work at one of the academies, so most of their patients are college students. So they're trying to keep them as safe as possible, with the assumption that they can't take care of themselves or that they just need something that's easy. And that's all fine, but there also needs to be other access to choice, to other options. Because I've heard you talk about that before, about how these doctors aren't the devil. It's easy to come up with theories. It's more that they just want what's easy for them and for their patients. But at some point, we need to also be given other options, instead of one of the first questions they ask you being, do you want to be on the pill? So that's where I am. I wish they didn't ask that as one of their first questions. I wish that they gave more options.
Well, and, in all fairness, too, it was interesting in my interview with Dr. Miranda Naylor. She spoke about that because now she has all this knowledge about, fertility awareness and hormonal contraceptives. And she felt a lot of guilt about, she's a medical doctor, about all the years she was prescribing it. But she's like, so now I offer options, but ultimately the patient comes in already knowing what they want. We all do. When I went on the pill when I was 16, I knew exactly what I wanted. I went into the doctor and I said, I have painful periods, I bleed a lot. And he was already writing the script. But that's what I wanted. I went in there knowing that that's what I wanted. And so I don't know if that's the place for this educational conversation, to be honest, because you couldn't convince a woman who came in there for the pill to get, you might be able to convince her to get like an IUD instead, or, right. Oh, try the ring or whatever they're promoting that month. But I don't know that you could tell her like, okay, I think you should do fertility awareness, because ultimately when women come to that, they have come to it. They have come to that decision that that's best for them. So I feel like the education then has to start before. It starts when, Briana, if you at some point decide that you want to start a family and then you have a daughter, like I feel like this is when it starts for all the women listening that have, children of their own, nieces, nephews, friends, whatever the case is. essentially educate the next generation, because ultimately no one could have told us when we wanted to go on the pill to try, like, you know, we're all pretty, I don't know, I'm pretty stubborn. I get my mind on something, right? Like I had to come to it of my own kind of volition.
Right. I think it's also important to talk about, because I wonder if some of this also has to do with the way, especially where I am in the US, where the political conversation comes up, because you basically have one side that doesn't want access to contraceptives. And so then the alternative becomes, well, we can't say anything bad about it because that means that they want to take away our access. And so I think if we're actually honest with ourselves, is saying, okay, well, this access needs to be here, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be able to talk about some of the downsides. So if a teenager in her health class is told, I can always get pregnant and here's how not to get pregnant, then of course they're going to want to go on the pill. And of course that's going to be their, you know, when they make up their mind and go into their doctor, like you said, then that's where they are. If they don't realize that there are possible problems with it. And that's something to be aware of in my local community. Maybe try to encourage some of the Planned Parenthood clinics to have other options in case someone does want it. We don't all have the access to the funds to have the training available. And so that's important to me, but there might not be the access for everyone. Mm-hmm. So,
well, I'm so glad that you brought up that point, because it's a really important one. And it really just speaks to where we are and where we have to go. Being in Canada, it's a little bit less contentious. So I don't have a super close awareness of like, okay, this could be taken away. Our prime minister was dancing in the Pride Parade last year. So it's like, we're in a different spot politically. So but it's really important to remember that. I don't like that. It's like you're living with an axe over top of you that could drop at any time. I've spoken about that a number of times on the podcast, whether it's access to abortion, whether it's access to birth control, whether it's maternity leave, and not having access to that. You know, there's a long way to go. And ultimately women need to be supported for the time being. I think the overarching message is just that we have to take responsibility. I don't know if that's the way I put it, but I feel like we have to take ownership of our fertility and recognize that what I always say, which is that no one cares more about your health and your fertility than you. And so at some point you have to take the reins and decide what's going to be best for you. We can no longer just defer it to our physician and assume that everything's just going to be great. I don't have to pay attention. I don't have to look at the ingredients in this stuff. I don't have to look at the side effects on my own. We all have to really take ownership of that, because who has your best interests at heart? You know, ultimately It's you. So,
right. And this should be a similar subject to what you were saying about ingredients in food. And I've heard you mention before, it's like all these people that they care about what's in their cleaning supplies and whether they're eating organic food, and yet they don't see that that's not really going to help them if they're on the pill. And I'm certainly guilty of that. I was on the pill and was looking up some of the things that you could eat or use for hormonal balance. And how bizarre is that here I am like using coconut oil and flaxseed when it's not going to do anything for me because I'm on the pill. So yeah, that's an important conversation to have too.
Well, could you imagine if you went to a restaurant and you had their famous meal, whatever it is, it's delicious and whatever, and then you go home and you don't get your period for 3 months. Right. Like, we have to stop being immune to that. That's just not okay. So That's the way I look at it. I'm just like, somehow we are immune to the fact that like you take a little pill and it actually prevents you from ovulating. That's a really big deal, but you know, we'll get there. We have lots of work to do, but we'll get there. Briana, you had so I could look at you, I feel like, as the canary in the coal mine. I feel like women who are quote unquote sensitive to the whether you want to call it sensitive to the hormones, or whether you want to just say that women who react kind of swiftly, women who react more severely on the higher obvious side, I feel like that is the early warning sign. So your reaction might have been stronger, but someone on the other side of the continuum may have had mild reactions that don't really cause her to question what's going on and then prompt her to stay on it long term. So although it probably, like in the moment, it was horrible and it seemed like this horrible disaster, it protected you from being on it for a really long time, because you physically couldn't really be on it just because of the way it interacted with you. So, looking back on all of that, what would you want to tell your 16-year-old self?
Oh, well, to tell my 16-year-old self about this is that there are a lot more options out there than what has just been portrayed in your health class and by your parents. I grew up in a place where I assumed I was getting good sex education because it seems like a better place for it. But now looking back, it still wasn't that comprehensive. And I wish I had known all of the options, and that it's okay to ask for help. Yeah, and to be open with friends, because likely they could be going through the same thing as you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always found that. Well, I don't know if it's the same now, but when I was when I was a teenager, I didn't talk to my friends about my periods. It really wasn't until university, until we were a little older, that we were more open and candid about those things. So I don't know if that's an age thing or that was just a personal experience of mine. But thank you so much for coming on the show, Briana. It was, I just want to thank you for sharing your story and being so open and vulnerable with your experience. I know that a lot of women listening to the show are resonating with your experience now and are also really appreciative that you were able to just talk about it, because we need to talk about this stuff more.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Lisa, for everything you do and for doing this particular podcast.
And so I just want to thank you again, Briana, for sharing your story. As I did these interviews, so there was one day that I actually interviewed 3 women, I think, in the same day for this project of mine to talk a little bit more about the pill on air. And it was a hard day. I think, at the end of that day, I actually went live in the Facebook group to rant in the private Facebook group, because it wasn't a challenge for me to listen to the stories and to really validate the women who were able to share them. But I found it to be incredibly frustrating, the threads of similarity in these stories that you'll continue to hear. The minimization in the general sense from the medical professionals, where they don't really see this as a valid problem, or they're just not really concerned about it, or they're not making the links. And even the fact that Briana had a really negative experience on hormonal birth control, and then her physician was really quick to put her back on it again and encourage her to stay on it, even though she was having problems again, like that kind of stuff. So in this next interview that I'm going to share with you, you can listen into my conversation that I had with Cieara. So I'll just roll that now. So I'm here with Cieara. Cieara wanted to share her story on hormonal birth control. And I was just telling you, Cieara, how your story really struck me. I think that by you sharing it on the podcast, it's really going to help a lot of women. So I guess we could just start by maybe you could just share with us when you first went on it, why, and what your experience was like.
Okay, so this was 2014 because I got married. So right after I got engaged, I decided to get on birth control to, I guess, get my body used to it. I'm not sure. So I was on it for a few months before I got married, and then going into like the first few months of marriage. So in total, it was only about 7 or 8 months. However, during the engagement, while I was taking the pill, I started to notice that my just overall mood and just disposition in life just like kind of took a nosedive. Basically, before that, I would probably describe myself as just optimistic and definitely not someone who like looking for, thinking that bad things would happen. I was never like the anxious type of person. As soon as I got on the pill, maybe like a month into it, I just noticed that I was always thinking something that was going to happen. Every time I would call my then fiance and he didn't answer, I would just think of like the worst possible case scenarios as to why he wasn't answering. It was so bizarre. I chalked it up to during that time because I wasn't thinking about the pill. I had lost a close cousin, 2 years prior to that, to cancer. And I was thinking that maybe, I don't know, I thought maybe it was something to do with the grieving process. I just chalked it up as that. I didn't even think anything about the pill. So this is going on with my mood. I was always thinking something bad was going to happen. I always felt like there was like some cloud just hanging over me. But I never really talked to anybody about it because I just was like, well, maybe it's just, remnants of the grieving process. During that time also, I started to get like chronic yeast infections. And before that, I never, ever had any issues with yeast or out of whack pH balances with myself or anything like that. But about 2 months into the pill, I started getting yeast infections. I didn't even know what it was. I went to the doctor. They prescribed me antibiotics. No, they prescribed me Monistat. No, it wasn't Monistat because that's the store brand. They prescribed me something, a prescription, to get rid of the yeast, but it caused other issues. So I had to have something else to combat that. And then I just got in this vicious cycle. So that was going on for months and months.
What were the other issues just that it caused, the drug thing for the yeast?
So it killed the yeast, but then it caused like a bacterial, because yeast is fungus. So it like killed the fungus, but it caused me to have, I still don't know if it was bacteria. Is it vaginosis? I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah.
But I think, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
So it caused a bacteria, and then they gave me antibiotics, which caused the yeast to come back. And it was just I was literally in the doctor's office every month, like every single month. And that was around the time I kind of started listening to your podcast. I think was at 14. Yeah, because by this point I was married. So I think I started listening to your podcast sometime in 2015. Anyway, so it was just this nasty cycle. I was just going every month. I was going back to the doctor to get a new prescription for something else. And by maybe the 4th or 5th month, I was actually writing it down. So it's like, okay, they said this on this day. So maybe about the 4th appointment, I like told my doctor, I was like, don't you think this is just like an unhealthy cycle? Every time I come here, you give me something which causes this, which caused the yeast to go away, but then you give me something else, which brings the yeast back, and then I'm back again for the same prescription. It was just like a yo-yo. Anyway, so I got off the pill in December of 14. So I was married in September, and I got off the pill in December because by that point I started getting headaches. And I told my mom about it, and she told me that she also had migraine headaches on the pill. So I hadn't thought about the yeast or the mood or anything like that, but the headaches was something that my mom was able to identify with. So she said, maybe you should try something else. So I just got off the pill completely. And that's around the time I found your podcast. So I was like, I can just try an alternative thing. Wasn't really paying attention, but I think probably by February, all my symptoms as far as my mood had completely dissipated. Like my mood had completely lifted. And by March, the yeast was gone. I talked to my doctor and they said, oh yeah, the drugs work. And I was like, no, they didn't, because I've been taking those drugs for months and months. And as soon as I came off the pill, it was like everything kind of just came back into alignment. So that's basically my story. Even my husband, he was there obviously when all these different things was happening, especially with the yeast, because I was constantly like, I can't believe it's back. I can't believe this. To the point where now he's like, I don't want you to get on any type of, hormone birth control ever again. He was like, it was like wrecking your body. And he was like, it's not worth it. So.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing your story. Like I said, I think the listeners know now why your story struck me. I recognize that not every woman has really kind of quick and obvious side effects like you did. But even though you were having these experiences, I mean, maybe just share with us, if you remember when you went on the pill, did your doctor discuss any side effects with you?
Definitely not anything mood related, or honestly, the only side effects they told me would happen would have been quote unquote good side effects, like your period's going to be shorter and you won't have as bad cramps. Like your cramps won't be as bad as they were before. So there was nothing alarming or anything that made me like second guess, maybe I shouldn't get on this pill. It was nothing like that. So,
well, and from the sounds of it, it sounds as though you didn't, so you went off of it because of the headaches and because you could resonate with the fact that your mom had headaches and she related it to the pill, but you didn't go off of it because of the yeast. So you arguably just thought like that was just some random thing that was happening for no reason.
Yeah, I thought because, see, okay, the thing was I wasn't sexually active before I got married. So I told my doctor this, and they're like, well, sometime maybe it's your husband's pH that's throwing you off because you're not used to having this sex, and that's what's causing the yeast. So that, it kind of made sense. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. I've never heard of that before, but I was like, okay, maybe, I guess. So, but so, it was so many things I didn't know. And it was just, I guess, a science experiment almost. So many causes that it could have been. And I just happened to get off because of the headaches, like you said. And I guess I lucked out with that one. And then I started listening to your podcast, and it kind of makes sense, in retrospect, like, oh, wow.
Well, and how do you think your experience would have been different if before you went on the pill, your doctor would have said to you, okay, so these are some of the possible side effects. Some women do, not every woman, but some women do experience mood issues, and some women do, because that's the yeast thing. But there's a lot of other side effects that are, I would say, more common than what I used to think. I used to think the only side effect was like a stroke, but of course that would never happen to me. You never think that you're going to have that, so you kind of
and I did hear that before too. Okay, so now I'm way more educated. So now I wouldn't regardless. But back then I probably still would have tried it at least, just because it's so quote unquote convenient as far as not, conceiving. I would have probably weighed the side effects. I probably would have still tried it, but I would have been way more vigilant. And the second anything like out of the ordinary cropped up, I would have probably just stopped it immediately. But I didn't have that information. And I definitely did not know anything about your mood being changed in the pill. That was crazy to me, how that all happened.
Well, Cieara, I want to thank you for being here. I'm sure you'll be interested to know. So I've been doing a lot of research on the pill, which is why I put this out in our Facebook group to see if anyone would want to share. And I found this study, and it's driving me up the wall, but I found this research study, and what they were looking at, instead of looking at the side effects and how to potentially minimize them or whatever, they were actually looking at the characteristics of the women who complained about side effects, in a sense, seeming as though they wanted to identify if there's certain traits of the women who are more likely to complain, in a way to help doctors better prescribe and suggest them to. I'm not making this up. I'm going to link the study to this episode. I'm not making this up. So the study basically was talking about the delicate balance of doctors with how do you discuss with patients the potential side effects without dissuading them from going on.
Oh, wow.
And so basically what you were talking about, how they highlight the quote unquote benefits, but they don't really, and I don't know if it's because they don't know, or because they don't necessarily think it's valid, or because they're more concerned with the fact that it's effective birth control. So then that outweighs everything else. So it's effective. It works. We know it works. Yeah. So it doesn't matter if because I think from a step back, I mean, here we are talking about this now, like this happened quite some time ago, but I feel like it isn't a minor side effect to go from being an optimistic person to being a little bit crazy.
No, it wasn't, especially because it was going on during my engagement, and I look back now and I feel like I wasn't even as happy as I could have been. Like, I didn't enjoy my engagement because I was too busy just thinking bad things. I just had more anxiety, and you can't really, I mean, that just, it sucked. It really did suck. So the majority of my engagement, I was really anxious about stuff that never even happened or even possibly could have happened,
Well, and for anyone who's listening who had any type of, or is reflecting back now and has had any feelings like that, I think it's really interesting. And Cieara, you probably listened to this episode, the one I did with Holly Grigg Spall, the first one, it's a long time ago, episode 21, I think. But she talked about that and how that type
I remember.
of, I remember that. So it's like you're not alone, because then you have a group of women who are taking hormonal contraceptive and they're having these similar crazy thoughts like, oh my gosh, my boyfriend didn't call me, or my friend didn't call me, that must mean he's dead on the side of the road. Oh my gosh, he's dying.
Exactly.
And like, you think that you're losing your mind, but if you have a group of women who are all experiencing a similar type of emotional reaction to after they're on, hormonal contraceptives,
right?
How can you say that that's a mild side effect?
Exactly. No, that was huge. That was huge. It was even as annoying as the yeast was, and that was very annoying. And it became painful because it kept happening. The mood and the anxiety was way worse because I couldn't even escape it. It was always just there, just looming around, no matter what happened. That sucks. So that was actually worse than the physical side effects.
Well, I don't know. Do you have any closing or parting words for the audience? Just anything that you want to share from your own experience?
I guess I would just say educate yourself. Your podcast is a wonderful platform and a great escape out of just, I don't want to say the mindless, just do whatever the doctor says, because modern medicine has afforded us a lot of, great things, but you should definitely educate yourself. I did not do that. I didn't do any research. I didn't even Google birth control side effects. Maybe if I had maybe somebody else's story would have come up, or maybe your body, I don't know. I just listened to what the doctor said and just went on my merry way. And I paid a price for it. Thankfully, my mom was there, and she, just on a whim, I told her, and she said, "Oh, you should probably get off." And I was cured of my side effects. So, but definitely educate yourself. I would say that.
Well, thank you so much, Cieara, for being here and for sharing your story. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode at fertilityfriday.com/137. Yeah, so thank you again, Cieara, for coming on the show. As you could tell, I was kind of a little bit beside myself listening to Cieara's story, just because it's just so incredible that all of the kind of lengths that her physician went to really around the problem. So there was a clear cause of this problem. Her recurrent yeast infection started pretty much right after she started hormonal contraceptives. That was kind of one of the only major shifts that she had experienced in her life. But again, her physician wasn't connecting those dots, and ultimately she was the one that had to make that effort to come off of hormonal contraceptives. And ultimately, it was actually the headaches that she experienced that brought her off. And it was only because she was able to talk to her mom, and her mom had that experience on hormonal contraceptives. So that was what plagued her. So thank you again, Cieara, for sharing your story. I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode. Ultimately, my hope with these episodes is just to raise awareness. It's really just to have these conversations in a public forum, so that I know that the women who came on here and very bravely shared their stories, they're not the only ones that have had these experiences. It doesn't take long for you to, once you open up these conversations and you start talking to your girlfriends, your sisters, your mom, your cousins, your coworkers, whoever you're comfortable enough talking about periods with, and, hormonal birth control side effects. But once you start talking about these things, all of a sudden, all these stories come out of the woodwork, and you'll hear women say, I didn't really have any side effects, but, I started getting headaches and whatever, or I just noticed that, this was going on for me, or that was going on for me. And eventually I came off and I realized that it stopped. So part of this is really just opening up this conversation so that we can normalize when you do have side effects. So one of the things that I continue to say throughout these interviews, and that I want to make sure is really clear. There's a couple things. I'm not sharing this information to say that there's never a place to take hormonal contraceptives, or there's no place for it in our lives or anything, or no one should ever take it. I've taken it. I say that every time because I have. There was a period of my life where it was the only thing that I knew, and it was the only thing that made sense for me at the time. And so my intention really behind sharing this information is to just provide a little bit more context and to help us to really get to that place, if we're using something like hormonal birth control, that we're really giving our informed consent. And so, of course, informed consent means that we have the information that is required to make that decision, and then we make a decision based on having adequate information. And so ultimately, if you don't know that these could be side effects of hormonal birth control, if you don't know about the potential emotional side effects, on the websites for these pills, all of the companies that make hormonal birth control, I would encourage you to go to one of the websites and look at it, because it's really interesting. But I mean, they categorize, it's not like they don't tell you about these potential side effects, but the way that they say them is a little bit misleading. So to say mood disorders, well, there's a lot of things that fall under a category of mood disorder. Whether you have, intense raging depression, whether you have, lack of kind of energy, feeling of lethargy, just a feeling of dread, which is what comes up a lot when I talk to women about their experiences on the pill, loss of luster for life in general, kind of a pessimistic attitude. Whether it's something like that or full-blown anxiety, panic disorders, if you don't know that those types of symptoms are associated with the pill use, then you just think you're crazy. And so part of it is really having the conversation. So at least you're informed that, and then if you happen to be unfortunate to have these types of reactions, then at least you know. Because if you don't know, then you don't have the power to really do anything about it. Okay. So that's really important to clarify. And then the other reason that I feel like it's important to talk about the pill, on the show a lot, I feel like once you have all the information, then although the pill might be completely right for you at one point in your life, you may get to a different point in your life where all of a sudden you realize that it's not necessarily the best thing for you anymore. And understanding how your body works, how your cycles work, fertility awareness, all those things, that helps you to really make those informed decisions. And instead of feeling like you don't have any options, like the pill is the only option and you have to be on it and that's the only way to effectively prevent pregnancy, now okay, there are actually other options for me. The pill is not the only thing I can do. There's a lot of other things I can do. And knowing that my fertile window each cycle is quite short, considering, less than a week where you can get pregnant in every cycle, that helps you to then make, again, an informed decision about how to manage your fertility given all of the information. So if you are, coming off of hormonal contraceptives, if you recently stopped taking them, or if you're, started charting your cycles and you're finding that it's a bit more challenging, a little less straightforward than you thought it would be, and if you're looking for additional support, I have several programs that I offer to support you through that process of learning to chart and getting to the point where you can be really confident in your observations. So ultimately, the process that I take my clients through gets them to the point where they can use the method for birth control with 100% confidence, really being clear on which days are fertile, which days are not. There's no gray area. And also along the way, learning a lot about their own fertility and their own cycles, picking up on certain things that could be underlying, because there's so much information that you can gather from your charts. So if you are looking to deepen into this knowledge and you're really wanting to get a head start, get it all sorted out so that you can just go and be really confident with the method and charting, then definitely head over to fertilityfriday.com/workwithme and take a look at the programs that I offer. And if you have questions about the programs, make sure to set up your free 15-minute consultation with me so we can talk more about it. If you have questions for me about what it looks like to work together, or just to see if the programs are a good fit, definitely you can sign up for your free 15-minute consultation directly from the site. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/workwithme. And I just want to send a special thank you out to the show sponsor, Cieara. Definitely head over to fertilityfriday.com/Cieara for more information about the products. So I just want to thank you again for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate all of you for taking the time to tune into the podcast, whether you're on the go or whether you're commuting to work, whether you're taking me for a jog, or whether you're on a road trip and you're catching up on tons of episodes at the same time. I really appreciate you for letting me be part of your day and for sharing the show, spreading the word. The show is growing, and it's all thanks to your support and all thanks to you for spreading the word. So thanks again. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.